It is about damn time. Finally, I have hit level 20 on all of my characters for the second time after my very upsetting reset that happened just before the release of Red Hood, and I've been waiting to do this video since I got reset because you guys loved the last time I did this. That video got 12,000 likes, which is crazy. I'm obviously not expecting that amount of support yet again, but I would super appreciate a like on this video because these videos take much longer to do than any other video, and showing me that support would be super appreciated. This time around, I've actually found a interesting way to show you more of the gear sets faster. I'm going to show all three at the same time for each character, but the downside to that is you actually won't get to see the name of the pieces of gear that I have, so if you actually are curious about any of those, you can leave a comment down below, and I'll be sure to either respond to you or somebody else will get back to you in the comment section about what piece of gear that actually is. Unfortunately, I only have so much screen space at a time, and if I go through each of these loadouts individually, we're going to be here all week. So let's get into the level 20 epic gear loadouts for Aquaman. Going from left to right, I'm going to be calling these 1, 2, and 3. What I like about this first one here is the red and silver contrast very well together. The trident is also cool. It's got a big face on the front of it. He just looks really powerful. The middle one, he kind of looks like a standard warrior, which I think kind of works with Aquaman. I don't think the colors synergize as well as the red and silver do, but I still think it's a pretty cool loadout that I chuck on every now and again. But my final and favorite loadout for Aquaman is absolutely this one on the end. I tried to make him look as much like royalty as possible. Trident has multiple emeralds on it going up and down. Chest piece has a massive emerald in the middle. The crown even has an emerald, and even his belt does as well. And the colors just mix together really well. Absolutely my favorite loadout for Aquaman, and for good reason. Moving on to Atrocitus, who is the only character on this list using a tournament shader. In the very first loadout there, looking really awesome. Something about the red ring glowing on both Atrocitus and the cat, Dexter, with that kind of dark golden color just really synergizes very well together. And I tried to put as many spikes as I could on this loadout because I think it also synergizes with that bright yellow on the end of the tournament shader. The second loadout is kind of meant to be what a deformed Atrocitus would look like. His shoulders are kind of all messed up. Looks like he was almost molded out of molten and lava. And finally, my third Atrocitus loadout using my favorite shader for Atrocitus. Originally, this shader was the shader I used on the loadout that with all the spikes, the first one. But since I got the tournament shader, which looks really, really good with those spikes, I decided to move this shader onto this loadout, which I think still looks fine. In fact, like I said, it is my favorite loadout here. Also, Dexter just looks awesome with that bright red. Moving on to Bane, the first one is as bulky as I wanted him to be. The shoulders are nice and bulky, the chest is all padded. The middle one's a little bit more slimmer. It's kind of an upgraded version of the default costume. I do this with a few different characters. I leave the default shader on and I throw some extra gear on top, but I leave some of the gear on default just to kind of get like an upgraded version of the default costume. And I think it looks pretty good, especially here on Bane. And the third loadout is kind of, again, a more of a slim look, but we are going for a bit of a different look from the default costume, of course. Also, I like the big knife that he has strapped to his chest as well. Moving on to my favorite character on the roster is Batman. The first loadout is, of course, meant to be kind of like an Adam West look. I was trying to find a real skin-tight suit for this, of course, and I did that mostly with, obviously, the chest plate, the big classic Batman logo, and obviously the legs and the belt. Like, nothing is really too bulky, but the arms are quite bulky, and I wish I was able to change that, but I didn't actually have any good arm pieces that really suited this look. So whilst I think I could definitely improve that loadout, I still think it looks pretty good. Next up is my favorite Batman loadout, the one I use the most, and that's using the Noir shader. It's a very tech-based Batman. He just looks super intimidating. Imagine running into this guy in a back alley. And finally is a bit of a take on Batman Beyond, but it's a little bit more tech-based. I've always preferred my Batman to be a little bit tech-based, and that doesn't change here. I think Batman looks fantastic. Moving on to Black Adam, this first loadout, it's actually kind of a rare one for me to use the God or the Demon shader on any of my loadouts because I usually don't like the eye effects, but I think something about it just really works on Black Adam, as you can see in this first loadout. In the second loadout, I've gone with a more traditional Black Adam look. It's again kind of an upgraded version of that default costume. And finally, again, kind of a more simple look, but it is trying to simulate as much as Shazam as possible. Here's hoping we do end up getting a Shazam Premiere skin. Black Canary, and this first loadout here is actually one of my favorite loadouts in this entire video. I'm not sure how well it shows up in just the screenshot, but when you actually play that loadout in motion, it looks fantastic. The jacket is animated perfectly. Everything about it is just so good. I cannot say enough good things about that loadout. It's so awesome. The middle one, loadout number 2, is a bit of a reference towards White Canary from the DC Legends of Tomorrow TV show. She's such a cool character, and if you do watch those shows, you do know how important she is to the show, and I knew I had to have some loadout that somewhat references her, And again, it's just a bit of a shame you can't turn off the white eyes. And the third loadout is meant to be kind of a more basic look for Black Canary. No knee pads, no elbow pads. Actually, there is knee pads, but there was no legs I had without the knee pads. The jacket is fairly basic, and it's sort of meant to be. Next up is a blue Beetle. This first loadout is fantastic. You can't quite see the scarab just because of the angle of the camera. I assure you the scarab looks awesome. It's the one with the highlighted colors on the back, and it just suits the loadout so much. This one is all about the highlighted colors. Even the helmet has like the highlighted neon lights, and it looks fantastic. This next one looks awesome, mainly because of all that silver. It just looks so good, right? The helmet's fantastic, the scarab is fantastic. Mostly when I play Blue Beetle, I alternate between loadout 1 and 2. Loadout number 3, however, is just kind of going for all the unique stuff and molding it together. The unique arm piece, the unique helmet, the unique scarab, all of that's just being thrown into one. It doesn't necessarily synergize very well. I wanted to include them on a loadout because I think they all look very cool. Brainiac is next, and he does not disappoint. This first loadout is meant to be as mechanical as possible. Chest plate, very mechanical. His shoulders even the tendrils are more mechanical than the next one. The next one is meant to be all about the bulk. Very, very bulky, very, very heavy. I think it looks perfect. The only thing I don't like is the white eyes. I really wish you could toggle that on the God shader, but apart from that, it looks really good. The final loadout is all about the lights. We got lights on the tendrils, we got lights on the chest plate, we got lights even on the leg, and in game, when it's actually moving, it looks brilliant. Next is Captain Cold. What I really like about this first loadout is how many grenades he has. I've counted them. I think it's like 14 grenades. A little bit overkill, but regardless, I think it looks really good. I use the demon shader in the next one, and the main reason for it is because it looks pretty good, and you don't get to see the eye effects because obviously Captain Cold wears a mask. The final loadout is meant to be one of those upgraded versions of the default loadout. This first loadout for Catwoman is meant to illustrate that thieving character she is. I really wanted to incorporate the hood because I think it looks really good, but I actually don't have any epic pieces of gear with the hood, so this is a rare piece of gear and would look much better if I actually had an epic one, but I don't. The second loadout, again, I've gone with the God shader because we don't get to see the eyes because we're using the visor, and look at that, when you don't get to see the eyes, the God shader looks fantastic on Catwoman, especially because of that neon highlighted whip. This next one was a bit of a challenge for me. I actually used only rares as a challenge specifically because I actually do have more than enough gear to create 3 loadouts completely epic for Catwoman, but I wanted to see what I could do with specifically rare gear, and I think I did a pretty good job. It looks pretty awesome. Handle on the whip is highlighted pink, which I think looks pretty cool. Moving on to Cheetah, I'm gonna be completely honest. When I play Cheetah, I'm usually using the Vixen Premier skins. I don't often take a look at her gear, but these are the 3 loadouts that I have. They're all just kind of tribal in different ways. I'm sure I don't need to go into too much detail when it comes to each of these, but they all look cool for their own different reasons. But again, nothing's gonna beat the Vixen Premier skin for me, so I use that most of the time. But when I'm not using the Vixen Premier skin, generally I go with that third loadout. I don't know why, it's just very Cheetah to me. Moving on to Cyborg, who has some of my favorite gear loadouts in this video, especially that first one, which is again meant to be kind of a take on an upgraded version of the default costume, but upgraded is the correct word. Look at how awesome that loadout looks. That is Cyborg, my dude. Very bulky, the helmet looks fantastic, the cannon even. This first loadout is the perfect Cyborg for me. The second loadout uses my favorite shader for him. Regardless of the situation, bright colors are awesome, and we need more of it in Injustice 2, and Cyborg is certainly lighting it up with this very bright shader. This third loadout here is kind of meant to be a broken down Cyborg. If you look at everything about him, the helmet is slightly more crackly than all of his other helmets. The chest is not as bulky. I don't know if I necessarily pulled it off, but I was kind of going for a more broken down version of Cyborg. Hailing from Apocalypse, let's have a look at Darkseid. First loadout, I'm going for that big bulky look, of course. The big shoulder pads, the big helmet, it's all about being bulky. The second loadout is kind of meant to be a bit more of a slim, traditional Darkseid look. Loadout number 2 is definitely the one I use the most, but that being said, I don't play a whole lot of Darkseid. And finally, yet again, another character I am using the God shader on because I think it looks pretty good on Darkseid, even with the white eyes and the way it makes his skin look. It makes it look like stone, and it just works for Darkseid. I'm not quite sure why, it just does. Deadshot, man, I love Deadshot's gear in this game. It's so good. Look at loadout number 1. That demon shader looks fantastic on Deadshot because, again, the eye effects don't work, so it's nothing but demonic black and demonic red. This next loadout, while looking like the God shader, is not actually the God shader. There is a massive difference between this one and the God shader. The God shader adds like a bunch of gold to the character, which I don't think really suits, but I do think this white shader looks fantastic. The helmet is something that I don't feel like a lot of people are going to like, but I love that helmet, especially in combination with this fully white shader, making the gun purely white as well. Everything about it just looks so clean. And the third loadout is meant to be, again, an upgraded version of the default loadout, using the default shader and the default helmet Dr. Fate, one of my favorite characters on the roster and somebody I want to put a lot more time into. First loadout being my favorite one. I love the black and white colors. I've always loved black and white. I think it clashes really well together, especially when it's bright white and dark black. Although this shader is not a particularly good example of that, I still think it looks really good. Moving on to another color combination, which I love, is the silver, black, and red, and Dr. Fate's cape really does help contrast all of those colors together. And the final loadout, I did go with a bit of a different look because I don't often use this shader and I wanted to get a chance to use it, and this is the loadout I ended up creating with the shader, and I'm pleasantly surprised. I'm going to start using this loadout a lot more because I think it turned out pretty well. I especially like the Dr. Fate symbol there in the middle. Moving on to Firestorm, we've got some more traditional looks for Firestorm in here. The first and third loadout I can kind of talk about at the same time. They're both trying to be more traditional Firestorm looks that I kind of just interchange whenever I necessarily want to. Although they do have very different pieces of gear when you look at the legs. In fact, the only thing that is the same is the shoulder pads, and I have used those same shoulder pads across all three loadouts here because I love the shoulder pads. I think they look fantastic for Firestorm. That clash of color really helps. The second loadout, however, does use the Deathstorm shader, and I think it looks really good. This is definitely the one I use the most when I play Firestorm, and then I interchange between the first and third loadout whenever I want a more traditional look. Gorilla Grodd is a character I don't get to play too often because he's just not necessarily my playstyle, but I do have some pretty awesome loadouts with him, as you can see. The first loadout utilizes that brass color you get from the shader. The second loadout has more armor around the chest area and uses the God shader, which I do think looks pretty good on Gorilla Grodd despite the IFX. Specifically, the IFX do look really good on Grodd. I'm not quite sure why it works on Grodd and not on other characters. It just works really well. Maybe it's because he looks cartoony because he's a talking ape. I don't know. And the third loadout is kind of a more basic one, using the silver as much as possible in combination with that green color, which I don't think looks particularly flashy or quote-unquote good, but I do think it's supposed to look a little bit more tribal. Oliver Queen finally making his way onto this list. A more traditional look here in the first loadout, using the bright green in combination with some more military-based gear. I wanted to incorporate the Robin Hood hat. I wish I could say I use this loadout the most, but I don't because I don't actually play the character a whole lot. It's a character I do want to start playing a lot more, and I'm a bit disappointed I didn't pick him up earlier. Bit of an Arsenal look here on the second loadout, and for good reason. Arsenal's an awesome character, and here's hoping we do get a premiere skin for him at some point. But for now, this is going to have to do. We've gone with a more bare bones look here, showing off those biceps and using the baseball cap. The third and final loadout is meant to be a more basic look for him, removing the shoulder pads, again showing off those biceps. But it is a different arm piece, believe it or not. You can look at the gauntlets to tell the difference. But there's no blades on the legs or anything like that. The chest piece is fairly basic. There's no helmet or anything like that, or hat. Just a communications device and a mask. I wanted to show off the blonde hair as much as I could with this loadout because, of course, it kind of just clashes with his suit. Moving on to Green Lantern, he's rocking that pink and he rocks it good. The pink effects actually look really good. If you haven't used this shader in-game yet, you really should because the effects that come off of it are really, really good. I love this next loadout. Loadout number 2 is the one I do actually use the most because the effects are amazing, and you guys know me, I've said it multiple times in the past, and I think I've already said it multiple times in this video. Black and white is my favorite color combination, and this shader does not disappoint no matter what gear you put on. It looks amazing. And I believe this is the Rage Alternative shader. I could have that wrong, but it looks so good. I'm such a huge fan of this one. And again, those effects look so good. I really wish I could show you guys each of these loadouts in motion, but that would take up so much video editing time. These videos already take up a ton of time, but trust me, it looks amazing. Moving on to Harley Quinn. We got the bright blue and the hot pink on the first loadout, and I think it looks really good, especially with those guns. The second loadout is meant to be a more simplified Harley Quinn look. In my headcanon, this is her just escaping from Arkham Prison or something, mainly because the arm piece is called Escape from Arkham or something like that. And my final and absolute favorite loadout for Harley Quinn, I believe this one's called Sanity Check. I could be wrong. But the helmet is really cool. Everything about this, it just looks like she's ready to go to war. She's got the knee pads, the elbow pads, she's even got a helmet for safety. I think it suits the character really well. And if I did intend to play any more Harley Quinn, this is the loadout I would go with. Moving on to Miss Ivy. First loadout utilizes that pink with the long leggings and those bright shoulder pads and even the crown. Or if you want to call it a crown, it's more of a headdress. But showing off as much of that color as possible. The second loadout, kind of the same thing, but with purple. And we utilize different gear pieces instead. I think both of those looks come together really well, but the third one in this case is actually my favorite one, using the default headgear so that we don't have any of that headgear in the way. We just have the bright red hair. I'm a huge fan of red hair. Very iconic to the character as well. I think it all comes together quite nicely. Next up is Joker, and these first two loadouts actually only have 1 or 2 pieces of epic gear, and that's because I wanted a more simple look for the character. When we look at this first loadout, I'm not sure if you guys noticed straight away, but he's got shorts on instead of pants. And I don't know why that's so funny to me, but his socks come all the way up to his shorts, and it just, I don't know, it's perfect Joker. The only thing I wish I could get rid of is the massive shoulder pad on the right-hand side of his shoulder there. Actually, that would be the left-hand side for him. The second loadout is meant to be the classy Joker. This is his business suit, or his version of a business suit anyway, and he hasn't got any headgear on. It's definitely a nice alternative to be able to switch into. And the third and final loadout, I just kind of went crazy with the epic gear. As much epic gear as I could throw on as possible, as many layers as I possibly could, and I used my favorite shader. This next one is actually the first DLC character on this list, and the first character who is not a part of my first level 20 epic loadouts video, and that's Red Hood. I love the first look, of course, incorporating the standard, or not standard, but traditional Red Hood helmet without the eye slots. Just looks so cool. He's such a badass, and I love it. Loadout number 2 incorporates my favorite color of all, bright white clashing with that dark gray and the bright red helmet, all of it coming together very, very nicely. And the third loadout, I just went with something different, incorporating the hood but no jacket. I think it looks pretty nice, but it's definitely not the one I use the most. I kind of just alternate between 1 and 2. Moving on to Robin, I'm sorry if the off-centered pictures kind of frustrate you a little bit, but they need to be off-center so you can see the sword and the differences in the swords, and even still the lighting's not fantastic, so you still might not be able to tell the difference, but they are all different. Robin number 1 here is meant to be as much as a League of Shadows member as I could possibly get him. The dark red hood, along with as much dark clothing as I could get, and as much simplified clothing as I could get, but you can't really pull off that type of look for Robin, if I'm being completely honest, and it's kind of disappointing because that's what I really wanted to pull off. I wish I could get rid of the Robin logos and just chuck him in a League of Assassins or a League of Shadows outfit, but unfortunately you cannot do that. The second loadout is meant to be my more traditional Robin loadout, the big Robin logo there, and traditional colors, and kind of the shorter cape I like as well. That being said, the third loadout would be the loadout I use the most if I actually had the shader I want for it, which is the Nightwing shader called Damien's Regret Alternative, I believe. But I actually don't have that shader right now, so I've had to go with this one, which is called Nightwing's something. But imagine how awesome this loadout would look with that Damien's Regret shader that makes him look almost identical to Nightwing. Scarecrow has some of my favorite gear in the game, and for good reason. It's just so detailed. If we look at this first loadout, he's meant to be from some type of insane asylum. The helmet in combination with a straitjacket really does illustrate that. The second one, he's meant to be like a plague doctor type thing. If you've ever played any type of medieval game or fantasy type game, you'll know what a plague doctor is. If you've played Overwatch, you've even seen a plague doctor skin with Reaper. Very popular in fantasy, and for good reason. They look badass. And they are badass. And the third loadout, he's meant to look like some type of undead cowboy or something. And I think all of these loadouts are fantastic. And whenever I play Scarecrow, I do have a legitimate trouble picking between all of these loadouts, because each one of them does look incredibly good. I love Scarecrow's gear in this game, I really do. Moving on to our second DLC character, it's Starfire. This first loadout for Starfire just incorporates as much royalty-based stuff as I could. Lots of gems everywhere, or the emeralds in this case, along with that bright green shader. Looks so cool. Again, I wish I could show you each of these in action, in motion. I'm gonna start doing online videos again in the future, so when I start doing those, I'll try to use all of these loadouts for all of these characters eventually in a video so that you guys can actually see these loadouts in motion. The second loadout for Starfire uses the Titans shader. I absolutely had to use the Titans shader because even though visually it has nothing to do with Titans, I had to do it, man. It's Titans. And loadout number 3 is just kind of meant to be a little bit of a variety choice in between, somewhere in between number 1 and 2, but with a different shader. I'd say between these 3 loadouts, I have a ton of variety, and I like switching between all of them. Next is SubZero, the final DLC character on this list, and has some of the best gear on this list as well. I love SubZero's gear. I have no idea why it got so much hate when it was initially revealed. I love it. Loadout number 1, more traditional Sub-Zero look, and well, actually not really. The only thing that's traditional about it is the shader. Loadout number 2, going with the Bihan shader, and I think it does look very, very good in combination with all that awesome epic gear. And third, and finally, is the Scorpion shader. Looking so good, man. What's bad about Scorpion's gear? It looks so good. I keep saying Scorpion's gear. I meant Sub-Zero's gear. Moving on to Supergirl, the first loadout. Not really sure what I was doing with the first loadout. Originally, it started off as meant to be some type of take on, if you haven't seen the comic books, I'm not going to be able to show a picture in this video, but Superman had a daughter in a dream sequence. and I wanted to make this loadout look as much like her as possible, and I think I did an okay job, but definitely not 100% accurate, and you can't change the color of the hair either. It would be very hard to pull off an accurate version of that. The second loadout is meant to show off as much of that silver as possible. If you haven't seen the shader before in game, it turns all the metal parts, the golden parts, into bright silver, and I did want to use as much of that silver as possible in one loadout, and I think I've done a good job. The third and final loadout is meant to be a much more traditional look for Supergirl, incorporating some of the default look along with that Supergirl skirt. That very iconic Supergirl skirt, which looks so good in-game when you actually use it. So of course I had to have a loadout with that skirt. Moving on to Superman, who I was pleasantly surprised with. I haven't played a whole lot of Superman since the release of Injustice 2. He was like my second or so character I got to level 20 after my reset. And since then I hadn't played him. So I was pleasantly surprised when I went to go customize all my characters for this video, and he had such amazing gear. The first loadout looks incredibly bulky, very intimidating, using the SubZero shader with the Brainiac emblem. Just looks fantastic. The second loadout incorporates some of my favorite colors with that silver, black, white, red, all of that stuff combined together. And the third one is kind of meant to be I mean, it's the god shader, but it really does look like a god, or definitely some type of angelic figure if you're into that type of thing. Heck, if you're into the lanterns, you could even pretend that this is some type of White Lantern version of Superman. Moving on to the third final character, this is Swamp Thing. Many different looks going on here. This first one is meant to be as spiky as possible, using the god shader as well to incorporate that kind of bright white oak tree look. The second loadout is a demonic one, using all of that red pus along with the big club. I'm not sure if you guys can tell, the screenshot kind of just cuts it out, but there's a big bright red orb there on the end. The third and final loadout is meant to be kind of a broken down version of Swamp Thing. Half of his body is armored, the other half isn't. Next up is the Flash, one of my favorite DC characters. In fact, I'm gonna go on record and say the Flash is my favorite DC character, and for good reason. He's such an awesome character. The Hot Pursuit shader is being used on this first loadout. It looks really nice, of course. That slimmed down look. A bunch of references there in his gear as well. You know what I'm talking about if you're a Flash fan. The second loadout is kind of a more traditional Flash, of course, using the default shader, but I did go with a completely different white symbol there in the middle. If you don't remember, the default loadout actually doesn't have the white symbol. It's just kind of a transparent one, so it's red, just like the TV show, or originally in the TV show in the first season. But I switched it out. I added the white symbol, and I got a bit more padding around the legs and the shoulders. I think it's a much better look for the Flash when you're going for a more traditional look because you want that white emblem. The third and final loadout is that blue, black, and gold. Again, some of my favorite colors right there as well. So I think all of these loadouts give me a lot of variety when I play the Flash, along with my Jay Garrick and Reverse Flash Premier skins, which I love so much. Finally, the final character, Wonder Woman from Themyscira. Unfortunately, I do not have the movie gear for this character, so I wasn't able to recreate that. The reason for that is because I actually missed out on the event. I did play the event on my original account, but when that got reset and I had to make my new account, I didn't have the Wonder Woman movie gear anymore. But those of you with keen eyes will notice that the third loadout actually does have the Wonder Woman shield and sword, and I think the reason for that is because you can get them out of boxes now, because I definitely did not complete any Wonder Woman movie event. Maybe it's still possible that one day I will end up with the entire Wonder Woman movie gear set just through opening them up in boxes, but right now I don't have them. This first loadout is meant to be incorporating that shader with that bright gold, using as much gold as possible. The shield is nice and bright and gold. All the metal plating on her armor is all bright and gold. In contrast with that purple, looks so damn good. Speaking of looking so damn good, loadout number 2. More of a laid-back version of Wonder Woman. She doesn't look like she's about to go into a full-scale war like she does in these other two loadouts, especially in loadout number 1. That looks like she's on the front lines charging an army or something. Loadout number 2, though, is a much more simple look, and I think it does look really good, and especially in motion as well, when you use this character in-game. It looks really, really good, and I want to start using Wonder Woman more because I really didn't give her a fair shot at the start of the launch of the game. Finally, the third loadout, probably my least favorite Wonder Woman loadout. This would probably be my movie loadout if I actually had all the gear, but I still think it does look pretty okay. Oh my god, there we go, guys. This video took up so much time. If you guys could please leave a like on this video, I'd be super appreciative. My name has been Bilbzy. If you enjoyed this video, or if you have any questions about any particular gear sets that you saw in this video, let me know in the comment section below. I'll see you in tomorrow's video.
Holy mackerel.